Just a heads up, this episode includes reports of sexual assault. Please use discretion when listening. Welcome to Where Secrets Go to Die, the disappearance of Derrick Henagan. From the Detroit Free Press, I'm John Wisely. We left off discussing some concerns outside investigators have raised about the Michigan State Police handling of this case, and specifically, suspicions around Trooper David Moeggenborg. When I first started reporting this story, I thought it was straight up a cold case murder. Derrick Henagan disappears, he's never heard from again, and the search goes cold. But the more time I spent on it, the more time I spent in the Upper Peninsula, I realized this disappearance, this investigation, didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened at a specific time, in the middle of an opioid crisis, as millions of Americans got hooked on prescription painkillers. And it happened in a specific place, Michigan's Upper Peninsula. That's a place with its own culture and its own law enforcement culture. There are reasons why this case has evolved the way it has, and I think a big part of that is the Upper Peninsula. The investigation into Derrick's disappearance has lasted 15 years, but he's never been found. No one has ever been charged with harming or hiding him. And if you talk to people in the Upper Peninsula, people who followed the case, people who've watched the investigation, people who know some of the players in and around it, they'll say they aren't surprised.
The UP system is crooked. And I've told you guys straight up, it boils down to law enforcement.
That's Melissa Carriage. She's lived in the Upper Peninsula most of her life, and she knows the system pretty well. I wanted to talk to her because she knew Diana Maddox and some of the people Diana hung out with. She also knew Trooper Moeggenborg, and she's followed the Derrick Henagan case. Like several people I talked to, she believes that the law is not enforced fairly up here. In her view, some people get away with things. The cops turn a blind eye. Other times, they go hard after people who cross them. The people who work in law enforcement up here probably won't agree, but they clearly know that notion is out there.
I can say that sometimes perception and reality can be two different things, and I'm not saying that's the case, but especially in some of these small rural towns, the talking points of the rural perception may get some traction that may not quite match what is reality, though, too.
That's Captain Clint Michelin again. He was running the state police in the Upper Peninsula. He insists his department is good at policing itself. Others in the UP are also sensitive to the questions about fairness. Remember the Luce County prosecutor, Josh Freed? He's the one who declined to press criminal charges against Trooper Moeggenborg when he was accused of hitting his son with a canoe paddle. Freed noted in a letter explaining the decision that he wanted to, quote, take a moment to attempt to clear up any concerns regarding cover-ups, conspiracies, or bias, end quote. But Melissa said she's seen all of that in the Derrick Henagan case and in her own experiences. Melissa goes by Missy. She's a thin woman with straight blonde hair past her shoulders. She smokes cigarettes and talks fast, sometimes pacing back and forth when she does. In addition to raising her own daughter, Sadie, she was a parental figure to several of Sadie's friends. Sadie and her best friend, Heather Aldrich, got deep into drugs when they were still teenagers.
Well, the morphine came in their teenage years because they were so hooked on it, they had to have it. They could not go without it.
Addiction happens for a lot of reasons, but Missy said she believed Heather's was tied to something even darker. Missy said one day, in a private moment, she wondered aloud if Heather had been sexually abused.
And she hung her head and started crying and said, "How did you know?" And I asked her, when was the first time? And she said, 10 years old.
The addictions were also linked to something else: sex for drugs and money. Now, that's not as simple as it may sound. When I look closely at their situation, it appears at times that they were in business for themselves, but at other times it has all the markings of sex trafficking.
There was not one good guy. These girls that I have tried to change their lives have been with not one good guy that have not beat them or sold them or made them do something. And they would make them do it to supply their drugs. They'd beat the piss out of these girls all the time. And they tell them nobody wants you, nobody loves you, look at how you guys are whores, you're junkies. So the girls didn't even believe in themselves. Sadie to this day thinks it's okay that a man beats on her. I deserve it, she said.
Missy said that as the girls moved through their teen years and into young adulthood, she tried to help them. The two bounced around a lot, but they were like sisters.
Like I said, blood or not blood, Sadie and Heather were real siblings. They were as close could be.
They both became young mothers. Sometimes they'd stay with Missy, and she would look after their babies, get the girls food. She was willing to help them find a lawyer if they got into trouble. She didn't have a lot herself. Missy is divorced. She lives in a modest home in the woods. She struggles with credit card debt. But she shared what she had and tried to steer the girls into a better life.
So I would take care of them all the time and asked her just do good in school and stay out of trouble and don't be selling yourself because you don't have to do that. If you need something or the baby needs something, I will go buy it. It was a cycle they got into and I don't believe could get out of. That was their way of life of surviving. Was it right? No, it wasn't right. Have I gone into houses here in the UP with loaded pistols, kick in doors, kick in windows, and smash cars for these girls? Yes, I have. Begging them to call the cops on me. Have I reported everything I'm telling you now to cops? Yes, I have. Has anything been done 10 years later? No. So the truth be told, I'm here to tell it.
It's a sad cycle, often linked to addiction. It's certainly not unique to the Upper Peninsula. What might be different, though, is how it's been policed up here, at least from Missy's perspective. Missy said there were times when she saw her daughter and her daughter's friends get arrested. She also said there were other times when they didn't get arrested, even though they got caught drinking and driving or with drugs. Missy claims that's because police themselves were compromised. One cop in particular, Trooper David Moeggenborg.
Oftentimes, Moeggenborg would come here in my driveway, pick her up, and take Heather to his house on 10 Curves Road. And there would be other law enforcement officers. Heather and Sadie and other girls would be prostituting themselves to the law enforcement officers. Sometimes I wouldn't even know. I'd be going, where, Heather, where you going? Because she had a child here. I needed to know where she was at all times. And she said, I'm going with Mr. Moeggenborg to his house. And I'd be like, okay, I really don't want you to, but those kids would not listen.
Now, as you can imagine, I found no reports documenting cops trading leniency for sex. We heard it from Missy, who said she learned it from Heather. But Missy isn't the only one who heard that kind of thing. We heard it from a good friend of Heather. Members of Heather's own family had heard that she was sexually involved with cops, though not necessarily with Moeggenborg. And that idea that cops would do this to young women didn't seem far-fetched to some of the people I talked to up there. In all, we heard similar stories from half a dozen people, aside from Missy, who were convinced that kind of thing was going on. They believe some cops in the area were trading leniency for sexual favors, or at least willing to. I asked Captain Michelin, had he ever heard such accusations against Moeggenborg or other cops?
No, never heard of that before. If in fact that were something that was actually true, that would be just horrible to even think about such a thing. No indication that I know of has crossed my desk or crossed my bow related to such a claim or an allegation. So that I am unaware of.
But Missy insists it's true, that Moeggenborg was going around, and worse, with Heather and her friends. Missy also said people around town were afraid of Moeggenborg, and she believes with good reason. She said that during one of Heather's visits to Moeggenborg's house, things became violent. Heather panicked and ran from the house. At another point, Heather threatened to report Moeggenborg's conduct.
When she told him she was going to tell everything that had been going on and how crooked he was, that's when he beat her really bad. Threw her out of her car and left her in a ditch in Seney, 7 miles from here. And she called me to come and get her.
Missy said Heather's clothes were dirty. She had marks on her arms, a black eye, and a bloody nose. We heard a similar story from one of Heather's friends, a man named John Hutchinson. John shared a home with his brother Jody and Jody's girlfriend, Carrie Nelson. Carrie and Heather were sisters, and John said Heather would visit and confide in him. She told him about a violent confrontation with Moeggenborg. He was dozing in front of the TV when Heather called. It was about 2 a.m. She said she'd been raped, and she was lying in a ditch. John tried to get more details, but the phone was cutting in and out. They hung up for her to take another call. John tried to wake his brother Jody and Carrie. They were sleeping in the next room. They wouldn't track Heather down for the full story until nearly noon, when she showed up at the house. John said Heather's hair was a mess, and her eyes were puffy. He said she had scratches on her forehead and her neck, knuckle prints on the left side of her face, and a large bruise. Heather and her sister went into another room. John believes they took morphine. After they came out, Heather broke into tears. Jody, who went by Joe, asked her what was wrong.
She's like, he raped me, and Joe's like, who? And she's like, you know. Well, I'm in the dark. I'm going, who in the... If you know who a rapist is, then you need to get the hell away from me. And that's what she said. Moeggenborg raped me, and Joe's like, bullshit. But it wasn't like bullshit like he'd blown away. It was like bullshit like, really?
That's John. He said he watched the conversation, and at first, he didn't know what to believe. He said he knew that Heather had had sex with Moeggenborg before.
And you gotta think about my position then. It was like, I knew that she was on drugs. I knew what her lifestyle was, so it was like, is she trying to throw this poor guy under the bus? But I also knew he was shady, and that they'd been together, so it was like, why would he rape her when he can get it? Looking back now, I think she was even shocked that, I think it was like, bitch, this is what'll happen if you don't toe the line. Because it was like she was shocked that it even went down the way it did.
This was all painful to hear. And is it possible that in the middle of an opioid crisis, cops were just looking the other way on drugs and other crimes? Or worse, exploiting addicted young women? As far as Captain Michelin could recall, the allegations against Moeggenborg were strictly domestic complaints filed by his ex-wife. He said he's never heard complaints of exploiting young women. He also said the state police aren't afraid to investigate their own. He also cautioned that people are sometimes willing to believe the worst.
Like I said before, earlier when we were talking, if somebody has a claim of misconduct or something wrong, it doesn't matter where they're at. We will come and investigate, and we want to make sure that we protect the integrity of our agency and the integrity of the law enforcement community as a whole through accountability and making sure that we're doing the right things for the right reason. And if somebody is doing something inappropriate, I can tell you the sentiment amongst the law enforcement community is nobody dislikes a bad cop more than other cops. And we don't want that within our ranks at all.
Michelin said the geography of Upper Michigan can make it challenging to police. Most towns up here are too small to support their own police force, and the sheriff's offices are tiny too. So by default, a lot of the policing up here is done by the Michigan State Police. Now, in the years following the Great Recession, the state police closed several posts entirely. Others, including Newberry, were closed to the public, though troopers could still pop in if they needed to. The state police still service the area, but Captain Michelin tells me they do it from a post in Sault Ste. Marie, more than 50 miles away. Despite those challenges, Michelin insisted that they will respond anywhere to complaints of police misconduct.
If there's an issue in today's world where somebody is doing something inappropriate or taking advantage of females or doing anything that is outside the realm of what we should be doing as a law enforcement community, we definitely want to know about it. So if that exists today, I would implore and beg of those people to make it known so we can actually help them. We don't want them to wait and say, arbitrarily there's no police here and there's nothing that can be done about this. There absolutely can be. So if there's a victim out there right now that is subjugated to this type of stuff that is horror stories to think about, we absolutely want to know about it. And if it's not the case and that perception is being put out there, then we want to fix the perception as well. And we want that to be, all the citizens over there to be confident that, okay, everything's on the up and up.
Missy's not convinced. She said that over the years, she did report what she'd seen to a couple of troopers, but they never took a report. Instead, they accused her of repeating hearsay. One officer later told another that Missy was a druggie herself, a notion she scoffed at. As for Sadie, she was, understandably, afraid when we first reached out. My colleague at the time, Kathleen Galligan, had numerous phone conversations with Sadie over a period of months. She developed a trust with Sadie. As we were heading to the UP in January 2020, Kathleen said Sadie was ready to talk to us for this story. But the interview never happened. The night before, the police arrested Sadie in connection with an old drunken driving charge. She was in jail. Then, COVID came. We couldn't visit for a while. And when Sadie got out of jail, she ended up in Vero Beach, Florida, with a man. Missy said Sadie had gotten off drugs, but she still drank heavily. Vodka was her drink of choice. In late March, Sadie got sick, and on March 30th, 2020, she died. She was 29 years old. Missy said the cause of death was listed as ethanol poisoning. So we never did get Sadie's side of things, though we tried. And Missy says that's more than the cops ever really did. She said Sadie and others offered information to police on their drug sources.
When the girls would try to tell them the truth of what was going on, they labeled them as, you're just addicts, we can't believe anything you say. And a lot of it they look at, one less addict is one less addict we have to worry about up here.
We'll be back after the break. And we're back. Dave Moeggenborg's second wife, Renee, said she'd hear stories of some of Dave's police buddies spending time with young women around town. They would,
go up to the falls, you call it on falls, but in cabins along the way, abandoned places where they could go and meet up with girls or whatever. So that was always Dave saying it was them, never him, of course.
Renee never quite believed that. She said Dave liked to present a choir boy image, but as you recall, she knew differently. The remote nature of the Upper Peninsula would make that kind of thing easy. Many people from downstate and out of state have vacation homes in the Upper Peninsula. Maybe they use them on summer weekends, in the fall for hunting. If they're into snowmobiling, they may come up for long weekends in the winter. But for much of the year, those places sit empty, and some owners ask the state police to look after them while they're away.
There's a lot of places where they used to do welfare checks.
Okay.
For camp owners, I do remember that, because, I even worked for cops that would do that. The people would stop by and leave an address at the department or whatever, so yes, they would have to check on the camps there.
But wouldn't the cops be missed if they were out of commission for hours at a time? Not necessarily. Renee said Dave and his partner often had a lot of downtime between calls. They
would come home every single night and play Xbox downstairs in our downstairs. And I never understood that, like, why you're supposed to be on duty patrolling, and every night they would come and sit and play Xbox. So it would not surprise me nothing surprises me anymore.
Right. So they would do that while they're on the clock?
Yes. Oh, God, yes. I actually got really angry because their gun belts ruined my green. I had 2 green, like, wooden and wicker rockers, and their gun belts beat the heck out of these wooden rocking chairs because they'd pull them in front of the TV.
Now, in 2015, police were tackling some of the drug culture in a way, and it involved a few key people in our story. By way of reference, this is shortly after Megan Moeggenborg, Trooper David Moeggenborg's daughter, told the state police about the walk in the woods she'd taken with her dad. The one where she says she saw what appeared to be a makeshift graveyard. A drug enforcement task force, which included the state police and other agencies, raided a motel in Gould City, Michigan. Among those questioned were Heather and Sadie. Heather was 25. Her Facebook photos show her steel blue eyes, a fair complexion, and a dimpled smile. Her amber-colored hair was wavy, and it fell past her shoulders. Sadie was 24. She had blue eyes too. Her photos show long blonde hair that she often wore braided or up in a bun. Their line of work wasn't much of a secret. It appeared in an online advertisement for escort services on Backpage.com. That was a website, sort of like a Craigslist, that advertised escort services. It was eventually shut down by the feds as part of a human trafficking case. Among the ads was one that read, quote, "Drop-dead sexy 25-year-old women here to rock your world," end quote. The rate was about $250 an hour. Heather would later tell police that she placed the ads using a computer at the motel, or another one owned by a friend, Diana Maddox. Missy told me Heather was close friends with Diana. Missy said that during one of Heather's pregnancies, Heather even stayed with Diana. But they eventually fell out in part over money related to cell phone bills. Beside the motel was a bar. A few years before the motel raid, Diana's brother, B.J. Foster, sometimes DJ'd at that bar as part of a business called Midnight Entertainment. Midnight Entertainment booked live bands, brought in games of beer pong, and a specialty, oil wrestling. Women, including Heather and Sadie, would wear bikinis, cover themselves in what looks like baby oil, and wrestle in inflatable kiddie pools. Facebook photos of some of the events show older men dressed in jeans and t-shirts, sipping bottled beer as they watch the action. Some men would strip down to their boxer shorts and join in. If all that sounds seedy, police believe the situation next door at the motel was downright criminal. After the raid, Heather described to them a grim, almost cult-like environment there. One where Heather said she had to perform sex work to pay rent and get drugs, usually morphine, from the man who ran the show at the motel. As far as I can tell, he didn't technically own it, but he stayed there and used it to run his drug business. Heather said people were afraid of him. He sometimes made them call him God. And when they incurred his wrath, he would withhold drugs to make them feel the effects of withdrawal. The cops didn't find a lot of drugs or money on the premises. The guy witnesses claim was running it all eventually did plead no contest to a marijuana charge. But the prostitution and human trafficking charges didn't stick. So in that sense, that bust was a bit of a bust. Police did gain some insight into the local drug scene. Sadie and Heather were both candid about their addictions. In a handwritten statement to police, she described her struggles. "I am just an addict that is trying to numb my pain of my life," she wrote. Heather also identified another drug source, Coke Man Gary, and an associate whom she described as the main man. 2 months later, police would arrest those two men, after Heather and her sister Carrie and Carrie's boyfriend, Jody Hutchinson, were all found dead. Their bodies were barely recognizable, inside an SUV torched in the woods. Coke Man Gary, a felon who sports several neo-Nazi tattoos, eventually pled guilty to the murders. The main man beat the rap, but was later convicted of cocaine conspiracy in a different case. The motive for the murders appeared to be stolen drugs, a soured relationship with Heather, and fears that the three victims may have been drug informants. To Missy Carriage's way of thinking, those murders didn't have to happen. She said police had weeks to follow up on Heather's tip and go after the men.
And if they would have did their damn jobs instead of hanging Heather out to dry, she'd still be here.
There was another crime around the time of those murders. It was petty by comparison, but important to our story. There was a break-in reported at a small cottage where the three murder victims stayed. This was discovered literally days after they were all killed. Someone broke into the place and ransacked it. Among the items taken were a stereo, speakers, and a shotgun. But more interesting were a couple less valuable things that disappeared. John Hutchinson, who'd lived there for a time, said he had a Timex watch that was sentimental to him because it belonged to his father. He kept it in a cigar box along with a Korean coin his dad had. That was taken. John also said Heather kept meticulous notes about her activities. She wrote them down in spiral notebooks that she kept at the Hutchinson house.
She's like, I just like to write stuff down. And that's when she actually told me the story of, she documented, everything. Sexual, pill transactions, police contact.
Those notebooks had been kept on a box in John's bedroom closet, but they were gone after the house was ransacked. Now, in May 2015, the month after those murders, the investigation into Derrick Henagan was heating up. An aggressive trooper, Nathan Grenfell, was on the case. One of the people he interviewed about it was State Trooper David Moeggenborg. Missy told me that she saw Diana and Moeggenborg together several times, including once at a bar. If Grenfell asked about anything like that, it doesn't appear in any of the reports I've seen. It looks like Grenfell was asking about Moeggenborg's visit to Diana's house the day Derrick disappeared. It doesn't look like he was accusing him of being involved. You remember, Moeggenborg was there to take that stolen guns complaint from Diana Maddox. 11 days after he was interviewed by Trooper Grenfell, David Moeggenborg did something that would change the Henagan investigation forever. He died. We'll be back after the break. And we're back. Moeggenborg had been battling cancer for almost a year. On May 25th, 2015, he was in a hospital emergency room coughing up blood. He didn't survive. The cause of death was listed as massive hemoptysis, a form of bleeding that blocks the airways, and stage 4 lung cancer. In essence, he drowned in his own blood. David Moeggenborg, that 6'6" trooper, he'd run roughshod over his two families. He'd survived multiple internal affairs investigations and a lingering suspicion that he was involved in some serious criminal activity. But he didn't survive this. He was 44 years old. I say that Moeggenborg's death changed the Henagan investigation because it really did. Before he died, Moeggenborg had disowned his daughter Megan. You heard him say it in his final voicemail to her back in episode 4.
You are now disowned from the family. Don't call me. Don't call Charity. Don't call anybody. You're on your own. I will never forgive you for being a goddamn traitor.
Well, Megan says he also removed Megan and her son as beneficiaries of his life insurance policy. But one thing he didn't do, he never named an executor of his estate. Megan was an adult at that point. She was his next of kin. She was appointed his personal representative, which gave her access to his private effects. That unredacted internal affairs report I got from Megan, she found it among his papers. It was his copy. She found other things in his possessions as well, things that trouble her to this day. In a cupboard above his refrigerator, she found a coffee can full of dozens of driver's licenses, mostly people from the Newberry area. The corner of the licenses had been clipped off. Megan said he called them his trophies. I checked a few of the names against court records in Luce County and found that Moeggenborg had definitely arrested a couple of them. Megan found a wristwatch and other jewelry that she'd never seen him wear. She found notebooks he'd kept as well, listing some of the people he'd stopped. Among the names in those notebooks were Heather Aldrich, Carrie Nelson, and Derrick Henagan. By then, Megan had begun researching missing people in the Newberry area, fearing her dad could be involved. Megan said she heard about the triple murder shortly after it happened, through the news and from Jody Newman. Families of those victims also started a Facebook page to track that case. Eventually, John Hutchinson reached out to Megan. She suspects because of her posts on Derrick's page, and the two connected. They were texting one evening, and Megan described some of what she found in her dad's things, including several watches. John remembered his father's Timex, and he described the cigar box it was kept in.
And she's like, oh my God, John, I got your dad's watch. And I was like, yeah, I think it was a cigar box. And she said, now I know it's yours.
I had like a box that had belonged to him that was apparently their father's.
John said that watch and that cigar box had been in the same bedroom closet as Heather Aldrich's notebooks in the ransacked cottage. This was a startling revelation, and the implications are huge. Is it possible that in the final weeks of his life, David Moeggenborg actually went to, or theoretically sent someone else, to ransack the home of some murder victims? John Hutchinson and Megan Moeggenborg are convinced that's what happened. I'm not ruling it out, but I do need to qualify it. Megan said she believes she lost the watch in a storage unit that she had to let go. She had taken photos, so I asked her to send me some. The photo of the cigar box that she sent looks pretty much like John described it, but the watch photo didn't match John's description. Now maybe the only photo Megan could find was of the wrong watch. It's been years, and she said she wasn't sure. Or maybe it just seemed like the same watch and the same cigar box. Based on the evidence available to me, I can't say for sure. I can say that it shows the number and degree of unanswered questions in this case. About 2 weeks after Moeggenborg died, Megan said 2 members of the state police asked to meet her. They wanted her to show them the property where she said she'd seen what she thought was a makeshift graveyard. She'd reported it to them about 7 months before. Now, I should note, I found no reference to this meeting in the Henagan case file, and I found nothing about it when I requested reports related to Moeggenborg's residence. Megan said she took them to the property across the road. The property looked different. It had been 10 months since her walk with her dad, with a hard UP winter in between. Now, the trails were grown over. She saw tracks from some type of large machine that had been through there, maybe a tractor or a backhoe of some sort. Megan said she couldn't get her bearings.
As soon as I was about to find my way, they told me, they're like, you know what, never mind, the bugs are bad out here. We're gonna bring the dogs back out. I could feel that when I wasn't able to find my way, like they'd look at each other and smile and shake their heads and, you know, kind of like laugh amongst each other. I could tell that they were probably enjoying it.
Eventually, they returned with Megan to their car. Megan said one of them, a sergeant, asked her about the bad blood between her and her dad.
He's like, to be honest, he's like, I think it's bullshit. He's like, there's nothing out there. I don't know why your dad was out there. I don't care. He's like, to be honest with you, he's like, I think that you were coerced.
The sergeant told her that her father was a brother in blue, that he was well respected.
He told me that I need to let him die with a little bit of dignity that he had left.
It seemed like that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. 3 weeks after Moeggenborg's death, 9 members of the state police in the Upper Peninsula convened a conference call to discuss the Henagan case. It's spelled out in one long paragraph on page 183 of the Henagan case file. It's not super detailed. The heading is, quote, additional information, end quote. Captain John Halpin, who was then the commander of the Upper Peninsula, chaired the call. Also on the call was an inspector, 3 lieutenants, 3 sergeants, and that aggressive trooper, Nathan Grenfell. I'll read you a portion of the report, which doesn't seem startling on its face. Quote, the decision was made to change the file class to 900-1. As after 7 years without finding Derrick Henagan, it is our opinion he is a victim of homicide. The decision was also made to have a canine cadaver search several areas to possibly recover Henagan's body. Projected date of canine search is 6/24/15, end quote. So up until this point, Derrick was technically considered a missing person. Now they're classifying his case as a homicide. I asked Captain Michelin why the case was changed from a missing person to a homicide, but he didn't know. He wasn't on the case then, and he wasn't on the conference call when the change was made. But 9 other members of the Michigan State Police were. One of them later testified in a probate court hearing to establish Derrick's death. He said that the passage of time and no contact prompted the change. When I read the names of those state police to Moeggenborg's second wife, Renee, she recognized them. She said she and other members of the family had been complaining to some of them for years about Dave's abusive behavior. She said those complaints rarely went anywhere.
All of those people, like all of our information leads to Dave, and that's all those people in that frickin' conference.
The other key decision made on that call was the one to conduct the searches with cadaver dogs. The report says, quote, several areas, end quote, but it doesn't identify those areas. During the course of reporting this, I filed several requests related to both Derrick Henagan and David Moeggenborg. One request that came back included a stunning report, one that I had not anticipated. It's a 1-page report with minimal detail. It doesn't mention the Henagan investigation by name or case number. It has its own number, which is noted in the main Henagan case file. It notes that nothing was found. Here's what really startled me. It was unredacted. Not a single thing blacked out. It's titled Cadaver Search Land. It's dated June 24th, 2015. They searched 3 areas. One was the woods around the home that Derrick Henagan shared with Diana Maddox. Makes sense. In theory, that's where he was supposed to meet Diana. Another search location is described as, quote, sand pit area, end quote. That's clearly the property we searched in episode 1, the property where Megan said she saw a makeshift graveyard. The property Megan said she revisited with the state police earlier that month. We know that's the right sandpit area because it was due west of one other location listed on the report. That location was a home on County Road 98. The report says they searched the cellar, the barn, and the property. The address of that property is the home that belonged to State Trooper David Moeggenborg. So think about that for a minute. Trooper Moeggenborg dies, and 3 weeks later, state police, guys who knew him, worked with him, investigated him. They revisit an almost 7-year-old missing person report. They change it to a homicide. And their first task is to send cadaver dogs to the home of their recently departed colleague, Trooper David Moeggenborg. Next time on Where Secrets Go to Die.
I'm Trooper Grenfell. It's, 3:25 of 15 at around 11 o'clock, 11:04 to be exact. I have with me Diana Louise Maddox.
This podcast is a production of the Detroit Free Press. It was investigated, written, and hosted by me, John Wisely. Our executive director is Anjanette Delgado. Our executive producer is Darcy Moran. Kathy Kalashevsky is our story editor, and Jim Schaefer is our managing editor. Nicole Avery Nichols is editor of the Detroit Free Press. Sound design and mix by Garrett Tiedemann. Original theme music by Camilla Cantu and Brian Castillo. Thanks to associate audio producer Robin Chan and development and contributing producer Tad Davis. And a special thanks to former Free Press photojournalist Kathleen Galligan, whose initial reporting was instrumental to this story. Outside audio in this episode was provided by Megan Moeggenborg. For more on this story, including photos, videos, and source documents, see our Where Secrets Go to Die show notes. If you have a tip for me, you can send it in an encrypted email to wiselyj@proton.me. To support investigative journalism like this, become a Detroit Free Press subscriber. Also, be sure to rate and review this podcast. That's a huge help to us. See you next time. For help with mental health or substance use disorders, visit samhsa.gov or call their hotline at 800-662-HELP for free confidential referrals. If you have information on a suspected case of human trafficking, please visit humantrafficking.org or call their hotline at 888-373-7888 to submit a confidential tip or to access resources to help victims and survivors. If you or someone you know has been a victim of sexual abuse, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network can connect you to support services through their hotline at 800-656-HOPE or online at rainn.org.